Here's one for the conspiracy theories, and I don't think it's a theory at all. And I remember this way back in 1983 when Congressman Larry McDonald was shot down in that plane KAL007 near North Korea, Siberia. Um, and I don't want to say too much about Ron Paul, but because I know what people think, and I'm just sticking with what I think. But maybe this might wake something up a little bit, because this is something else I keep thinking about, and there's a lot of things I think about. They got rid of this guy, Congressman Larry McDonald, because he was the most anti-communist congressman in the whole Congress. Actually, that was agreed upon pretty much by a vote by, or an opinion by, his own colleagues in Congress. This is one statement he said, which is pretty relevant to what goes on. The drive of the Rockefellers and their allies is to create a one-world government combining super-capitalism and communism under the same tent, all under their control. Do I mean conspiracy? Yes, I do. I am convinced there is such a plot, international in scope, generations old in planning, and incredibly evil in intent. Representative Larry McDonald. Now, that's not just anti-communist, it's against anybody that's really the most powerful people on both sides of the globe. And they got rid of him. But I thought this is a very shrewd plan. You could say it's conspiracy theory, but I don't think it's a theory. I think there's a lot to it. He basically, when they shot down his plane, I know there were so many conflicting reports about this, and they said there's so many theories about, was it shot down and sank in the ocean? That's kind of the official story, but it probably wasn't. And the reason being is that it was in the air for many minutes after the first incident, and it seemed like the rate of descent was slowing down, and it might have landed near an island, and the people were picked up by the the Soviets near the island in Siberia. Then here it goes on to say, this is from Rents, and I'll post a link. There's a lot of stuff to read, but I think this should be brought to light about Congressman Larry McDonald. And you might say he's kind of like in the same camp as Ron Paul. Very conservative, go right back to our constitutional founding, that type of thing. Right? This guy is genuine. It's Larry McDonald. Guaranteed he's genuine. But this is the type of thing, I think this was a murder and a setup. And I don't think he was actually killed. I think most of the people survived the plane. And I'll get into reading this. And I don't want to read this whole thing. I'm just going to post a link. But just so you get the gist of it, I think the people on that plane, they all survived. And there was a lot of eyewitnesses to the fact that they did survive. And this goes on to say, I believe this was a pastor in Russia. It says, we have, right after the shoot down of KAL007, there was a Russian pastor held in a Soviet prison, and there were a whole bunch of Westerners who came into that prison the same week as the shoot down, dressed in civilian clothes. After a while, they put on regular prison clothes. This pastor came to the United States from Russia. Actually, we got in touch with him through a mission organization. They had contact with this pastor in Russia. He wanted to tell his story why he believed they were KAL007 people, the Westerners. I might say the report that came into Abraham was that passengers were taken off the plane by patrol boats, and they were brought to Sakhalin, and at Sakhalin they were separated into groups. The children were brought over to the mainland, and the children were basically distributed for adoption. When contacted, the Russian pastor refused to speak about the matter because he feared for the safety of his family. Still in Russian. Larry McDonald has the most tracking. It's still not all on the level of hard evidence, but credible evidence, meaning it has something that has got to be checked on by somebody who has the means to follow it through. According to our reports, McDonald wound up on Lubyanka KGB prison and was interrogated by Vladimir Khrushchev, the head of the first chief directorate of the KGB. He was taken to Lefortovo KGB prison, also in Moscow, and then taken to Sukhanova to a summer house where he was interrogated under drugs. And the report from there was that he no longer had an identity. They robbed him of his ability to know who he was. And that actually is the standard Soviet treatment. That's going to be the standard treatment in the United States, too. People don't want to hear that shit, but that's the way they're going to play it. They're going to play it like, if you don't think the way what you should be thinking, they're going to drug you up and they're going to screw your brains up. That's what they're going to do. That's how they do it in the Soviet Union. They used to do it. They didn't really have as many people in gulags as they had them in psych wards. They screwed them up that way. They're very good at that shit. Eventually, he was taken to Karaganga, which is a transit prison in, I'm not going to say the word. Of course, at that time, that was part of the Soviet Union, and that was the last tracking of him at a prison north of Karaganda called Timir II. These reports are from people at the time in the Soviet Union, but there are other reports that were received. These are reports from people who are family members of the passengers directly to us discreetly. One woman got on a phone call. She recognized immediately the voice of her husband, who had been a passenger on the plane, and then the conversation was cut off. There's these types of things they have still going on. This article was actually done in 2010, so I don't know how recent all this stuff is, but it's fairly recent. But the point to remember is the plane, after it was originally attacked, it descended, and then it was in the air for like at least 8 minutes, and they showed it at about 1,000 feet. So it probably had like a decent landing. It wasn't like didn't like nosedive into the ocean as they claim it did. In the first reports were said that there was a lot of survivors. But in other words, if the plane did crash into the ocean, even say it did, there would be debris, there would be a body count or something like that. I mean, because people would have had time to put on life preservers and things like that. So the bodies would have been floating in the water if there was something, most of the bodies, and there would have been an accountability. But there never was an accountability. So probably these reports are very good. And I know a lot of reports about prisoners of war in Vietnam were true, and they keep these people. They keep them forever, That's what happens, or they kill them, one or the other. Around May of 1983, approximately 4 months before the shoot down in KAL007, Congressman Larry McDonald took on Pat Buchanan and the Council on Foreign Relations member Tom Braden on Crossfire. They badgered him about his new role as chairman of John Birch Society, which was a very conservative society. He easily handled them and answered questions concerning elites' conspiracy for one world government. Remember, this was back in 1983. Some things survived the test of time. It's interesting to consider how many of these assertions that were ridiculed in 1983 have since proven to be accurate and amazingly perceptive. So, this I highlighted this because accidentally they killed their most powerful enemy in the world, which was this congressman in the United States. He was the most anti-communist congressman in the United States. The first news report said the plane was forced to land on Sakhalin, which was an island. Okay, so talks about it's been 25 years since Korean Airlines Flight 007 carrying 269 passengers and crew, including Congressman Larry McDonald of Georgia, was fired on by a Soviet jet fighter jet off the coast of Siberia. So I think this is like kind of what would happen to somebody who was really virulently against and actually doing something very constructive to stopping a one world government and returning the United States wholly back to its constitutional roots. This is the type of stuff that would happen. And there was a big outcry at the time, and a lot of conservative people, and there's a lot of conspiracies about this. I don't think it is a conspiracy. I think I don't think it's a theory. I think the plane was the people on the plane were actually captured and they were taken to the Soviet Union. That's what I think. And they just kept them, and that was it. And it's Congressman Larry McDonald. They were using one thing at that time. They valued Americans, captured Americans, because they wanted to test the psyche of the American and what the will is and how to break it. That's really a lot of what they were doing at that time. The attack, it goes on to say, the attack was not just against ourselves or the Republic of Korea. This was a Soviet Union against the world and the moral precepts which guide human relations amongst people everywhere. And this was talking about, that was Senator Helms talking, because he almost was on that flight, but he took another flight. He almost was. There was two flights that separated. Next was Senator Helms talking his statement here. Reagan talked a big line against the Soviet Union, big line, but the actions of the Reagan administration fell far short of the president's flamboyant rhetoric. Okay, this is what I see all the time. And if I was critical of Reagan at that time, and I voted for this guy twice, but I've seen other things too. I know people don't like hearing that shit. At the time, this guy, you couldn't touch him. You couldn't touch him. In conservative circles, Reagan was God. Said ain't one thing, but you know what? Because everybody bought into his stuff, he got away with a lot more too. Our government offered no meaningful resistance to the Soviet harassment of U.S. search and rescue efforts in the Sea of Japan, as Soviet ships interfered with U.S. and Japanese naval vessels and helicopters attempting to find and recover KAL007 in its black box. So they couldn't find anything. That's because the plane landed on the island. More meaningfully, Reagan failed to show through on his tough talk by employing any of the means possible to punish the Soviets, such as trade sanctions. And the reason for that is because the elite on this side of the globe are in cahoots with the elite on the other side of the globe. That's an absolute fact. Because the attack against KAL007 took place just after it had exited Soviet airspace and a plane went down in Soviet territory. It exited Soviet airspace, but it went down in Soviet territory. Most of what we know comes from three sources. First, highly suspect early reports from the Soviets. Second, radio transmissions to and from the Soviet jet fighters and their ground commanders handed over those transmissions to the Russian Federation years later. And third, transmissions from the airliners, flight crew to Tokyo air traffic controllers. Radar tracking by Japanese station also provided key information. However, for reasons still unexplained, the plane gradually but steadily deviated from its planned course until it crossed the Kamchatka Peninsula, home to the Soviet Far East Fleet Intercontinental Ballistics Nuclear Submarine Base. So I don't know why it went off course, but it did, which was really strange. According to transcripts, there was, because all the planes, this is like the only plane that did something stupid like this. And it just happened to have Larry McDonald on it after he's making these statements on, national TV about the Rockefellers and the communist bloc basically all looking for power on the top and one world government. It is a little bit too coincidental. According to the transcripts, there was no further transmission from KAL007, a factor that had been widely interpreted or misinterpreted to mean that the airliner either exploded or crashed into the sea at that point. But the plane was tracked on radar for more than 10 minutes after the last recorded transcript and was picked up on radar flying at 16,424 feet 4 minutes after the attack. 8 minutes later after that, the radar showed that the plane was still at 1,000 feet, indicating that the rate of descent had slowed. So it wouldn't have been nosediving, crashing, or anything like that. It was doing a slow descent. The pilot's request for instructions also indicates that he still had control over the aircraft, or else such a request would have been pointless. And, so he's probably trying to land a plane. I'm sure he did. I think that's, to me, I know they landed the plane on the island. To me, it's dead given. Kornochov then ordered that a MiG-23 be brought in to finish the job. However, due to KAL007's descent and heavy cloud cover, they could not locate the plane. The Soviet interceptors, low on fuel, returned to their base without having sighted the plane. The Soviets' radar told them, however, that the plane had descended to 16,424 feet. It was flying a spiral pattern over Monoron Island, and that's probably where they landed. Finally, 12 minutes later after the attack, KAL007 disappeared from the radar after dipping below, in other words, saying the same thing, below the 1,000-foot level near Monoron Island. The Soviets immediately dispatched squadrons of KGB, border guard, boats, rescue helicopters, and even civilian trawlers to the island. So, but nothing came, nobody found nothing, right? Nobody found nothing. In the United States, the news broadcast the evening of the disappearance of KAL007 reported that the missing aircraft had landed safely on Sakhalin Island, but by the following morning those initial reports were forgotten and the news was that the plane had been destroyed. So, what I'm saying is, this was all done. They had to get rid of this guy. Because basically saying kind of stuff that, Ron Paul says, right? Nobody wants to hear that, but, people like Reagan, who you couldn't say a damn thing about at the time, maybe you can now a little bit more. I think you can a lot more now, because people may be wised up, but maybe that's all past into history. But at the time, Reagan was an extremely popular president. And he looked like a hero. That thing was played up to the max. But a lot of it was a big show. The Soviet Union was coming down, and it was all planned. Major Golitsyn said so ahead of time. But a lot of other things point to that too. The fact that the Gorbachev Foundation was already established in a former naval facility near San Francisco. That type of thing. Now, I'm not just being so-called like anti-communist or something, but what I'm saying is that, which I am anti-communist, but I'm saying is that it's beyond that, and that's what Larry McDonald, Congressman Larry McDonald, was saying. It was like the Rockefellers are in on it, the Western elements are in on it. It's about pushing a super capitalism and a hybrid communism to one big world government. And that's what he was saying on national TV. So, anybody that's genuine, I say they get rid of him. They get rid of him if he's powerful. Helms proposed 8 specific, this is called Senator Helms. Senator Helms, I don't know if he was senator then, but it was Senator Helms proposed 8 specific sanctions against the Soviets to punish them for that heinous act, but both Congress and the Reagan White House worked to defeat those sanctions because they're trying to get together with the Soviets. That was the policy by the elite. In 1991, Senator Helms, as minority leader of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, issued a report that noted KAL007 probably ditched successfully. There may have been survivors. The Soviets have been lying massively, and diplomatic efforts need to be made to return the possible survivors. That was his statement. He asked for, if you would, list of missing passengers and crew, a list of dead passengers and crew, list of names of any living passengers and crew members from the airplane. Of course, they didn't find anything, They didn't find one thing. I can't buy that either, You don't have to be a conspiracy theorist not to buy that. Plane was doing a slow descent. It was near the island. It was circling the island for minutes. Everybody would have had on life preservers even if it went into the water. There would have been debris. There would have been people floating in the water. Even if they didn't survive the temperatures of the water, they would have been recovered. Why did Senator Helms choose this particular time to make this request of Yeltsin? For one thing, the old Soviet Union was in the process of reinventing itself. To me, that's a key phrase, as the Russian Federation and other republics. The major source of that information had been Abraham Sefrin, a former mayor in the Soviet army and criminal investigator at Krasnodar area of the Crimea, who was employed at the Soviet Ministry of Weapons before becoming a slave labor prisoner. Shifrin is best known for his 1980 book, The First Guideline to Prisons and Concentration Camps of the Soviet Union. Shifrin, who passed away in 1998, immigrated to Israel. So he's a Jew and a good guy. Okay. I know there's bad ones and good ones. Okay. Well, Shifrin, who passed away in 1998, immigrated to Israel, where he established a research center for prisons, psych prisons, and forced labor concentration camps of the USSR. Psych prisons are for people who don't think the way you're supposed to think, His contracts include not only former prisoners inside and outside of the Soviet Union, but even officials within the Soviet government. He has explained during an interview, went on an extensive speaking tour in the United States sponsored by the John Birch Society in 1983-1984. Because I was the chief legal advisor in the Soviet Ministry of War Equipment, I have many contacts. When I was in prison, my friends became important in the war industry. In 1991, Shifrin issued a press release saying his investigations into the fate of KAL007 passengers indicated that many, including Congressman Larry McDonald, were secretly kidnapped and held by the Soviet Union. I'm going to skip through this because I'm going to post this link, but this is probably one of the better articles out there, and it's pretty complete. But I do want to point out that anytime there's a real opponent of the New World Order, if you want to call it that or whatever, they better watch out. And I'm going to tell you, if they're going scot-free and nothing's really happening too much, and the major media is against them, big deal. That's the game they play. But if you're really against it and you're really upset in the boat, I think you're done. But otherwise, still find this a very interesting bit of history. Congressman Larry P. McDonald, Democrat, 7th District, Georgia, was separated from the rest of the passengers and taken by special air transport to Moscow on or about September 8, 1983. A special KGB guard unit was brought in from Khabarovsk, to accompany him. The KGB had a fleet of special aircraft the 910XX series that was used exclusively for transporting high-profile prisoners, VIPs, and others requiring the strictest security. These were only used for very short trips rather than overland transportation. Probably because it's a Soviet plane, probably crash. But they talk about the child prisons were kept in another specially established, isolated, temporary orphanage until the end of October, and then they put them in the different parts of the Soviet Union and simulated them. So basically, that's how everybody disappeared on a plane, But I wanted to bring this up because this is from 1983, and I don't know how old people were at that time or what, but to me, I definitely knew about this stuff back then. And we do want to point out that probably some of this stuff is well before some other people's times, but this guy, he's the one that he started stating a lot of stuff, Congressman Larry McDonald, about basically the Western establishment being in cahoots with the Soviet leadership, and both working together for a new world government that's going to combine communism and super capitalism under the same umbrella. So he stated that, and he was very vocal about it, and they got rid of him. So I know a lot of people at the time said, but what the heck, they make a movie about this, they make them look like a bunch of conspiracy crazies. But hey, the plane was landing kind of slow, circling an island, right? They had a lot of time to put on life jackets and stuff. Probably landed the plane on land in the island, probably on an airstrip. So, and then they tell you there's nothing there, nobody found nothing. Then they got that Russian, that pastor who was in Russia said he saw all these American prisoners coming in, or that were like in regular civilian clothes. Where'd they come from, right? At that time, you weren't just taking tourists in the Soviet Union, were you? And then you got that other guy saying that he was in part of the prison system, and he had a lot of information on what was going on. And he said that Larry McDonald was taken by the KGB to Moscow and interrogated, put under drugs, and he basically didn't know who he was after a while. They destroyed him mentally. And that's the typical way things are done when it was in the Soviet Union. It was done by the psych wards more than anything, because they were this way. It wasn't like you were a prisoner per se. You just weren't thinking the way they wanted you to think. That's really the goal of a lot of stuff. So they did that to Larry McDonald. So I figure I'll post this link and bring it out there, because I don't think a lot of people know about this, and it's too long to go through one of these YouTube videos, but I think it's pretty pertinent. The so-called conspiracy is a hell of a lot